Hello, everybody, and welcome to today's webinar. So today we're going to be talking about telling your sustainability story. Just before I kick off with a sort of an intro and get us into the session, just to say this is being recorded as well, so don't worry too much about making furious notes. So we'll share the recording with everybody afterwards. Also, as well, we want this session to be interactive, and this is a real chance for you to, whether that's share your queries, your challenges, or your concerns, or things that you're dealing with in telling your sustainability story. So do feel free to pop them into the chat box at any point, and we'll dip in and out of those as we work through today's session, so we can make this as helpful and interactive as we possibly can. So sustainability. So we need to do something about climate change. We know it, you know it, your people know it, but it is such a big and unwieldy topic, and it can feel quite overwhelming. I certainly find it overwhelming. So where do we begin? Whatever your goals and intentions as an organization, the message can get lost in what feels like a lot of noise. And then for an individual, it's hard to see what difference they can make to the bigger picture. So as I say, we're going to talk about how we can tell our sustainability stories strategically, and how we craft messages with impact and heart that encourage action and drive positive change. So to help us deal with this challenging and hopefully very meaty topic, I'm delighted to welcome Elle Bradley Cox, who is senior writer and editor for Scarlett Abbott, and also Alistair Atkinson, who is the consultancy lead at Scarlett Abbott, who have hopefully a lot of insights and experiences and examples to share with us as we try and tackle this challenging and meaty topic. So this format is sort of questions and answers, which is a lively conversation. There's no slides. We're going to delve into some really meaty areas. And as I say, if you've got a question, just pop it in the chat box and we'll weave that into our conversation. So let's kick off with like the first big question. So we probably all assume that we have a handle on the term. We certainly hear it described as many things: CSR, ESG, sustainability, but it means different things to different organizations. So I don't know, Elle or Alistair, who wants to take this first. So when we're talking about sustainability, what are we talking about here?
So I think, as you quite rightly say, Jan, it means different things to different organizations, and I think that's part of the complexity that I think we'll probably delve into a little bit during this webcast. But it could cover a whole range of things. So environmental issues, most obviously, is probably the first thing. It could also cover the sustainability of business practices. But also I've seen it in many clients being used to cover valuing people as well. So how do we treat people within the organization as employees, and how do we look after their welfare and make sure that we're operating a sustainable employee well-being model, and how do we treat the communities around us? And that can be anything from, you know, charitable giving through to actually being part of the community and contributing in a positive way, whether that's by, you know, employing people in the community, or by interacting with various organizations within the community, or just by being a good community corporate citizen in your local area, and, you know, potentially nationally as well. So you know, in my experience of working with lots of clients on this, it can mean slightly different things to different companies, but it can cover all of those things that I just mentioned.
And lots of clients take their leads from the UN Sustainable Development Goals, I've found. So I think there's 15 of them, and they give you a pretty good angle on what are the right things to be tackling. And like Al says, it's a myriad of things, even up to women and domestic violence, for example.
So do you think that, I guess it's really, because when you talk about sustainability in that way, it's so far ranging, and there's so much to it in terms of, I guess, that first step for us listening in and thinking about that, is it, do you think, a need to kind of go around to your stakeholders and understand what sustainability means in your organization? What do we cover under that agenda?
Yeah, I totally agree. I think in order to be able to talk about this stuff, you need to know what it is you're talking about. And I think if we go back probably 10 or 15 years, when we called this typically CSR, corporate social responsibility, that typically conjured up ideas around charitable giving. And that was what most businesses thought of and acted on when they talked about CSR. I think now it's become much broader, as we've just said, and different businesses will have different priorities. It depends what kind of business you're in. If you're a business that makes a lot of stuff, are you making it in a sustainable way, an environmentally friendly way? If you're an investment business, financial services business, are you investing in funds that are genuinely sustainable? And so you need to figure out, first of all, as a business, what is it that's really important to us, and how can we make the biggest contribution? Because chances are you're not going to be able to do everything all the time. So what's going to be the biggest point of difference that you can make? And it's only when you figure that out for yourself as a business that you can then start talking about it.
Mm-hmm. I agree. And I think that's probably the first step, isn't it? And it's that point around making it relevant to what your organization is, because we can't all tackle everything. So it's finding what's relevant to our operation and what we're here to achieve, and what are the changes we can make and the things that we should get behind to make it have meaning. I think that sounds like it's a really important thing to establish when we're thinking about telling our sustainability story as a first priority.
And to build on that, when organisations in the same industry work together on this, so forget those party lines and the bits where you can grab market share. This is about working together, and particularly in the same industry, you'll drive far greater change if you work together.
And I think this leads on to kind of the next area as well. So in terms of starting at the beginning, it's, well, what's sustainability mean to us, and what's our story, and what's our areas of activism, or those that we're trying to create the right behaviors that our customers and our employees and our investors can all get behind. So there's that point of relevancy, isn't there? Because like we say, it's such a broad area. It covers so much. And I don't know, but it feels like, and I think it's a really careful line to walk, particularly from an internal communication and an external communication alignment point of view, is trying not to see like we're trying to all do everything, or saying we're doing the things because it seems the right thing to say. Because often we think it's good PR brownie points. We think external, we should go out there, we should say we're behind it. But often they can feel a bit glossy and a bit with green sheen, and actually, are they in the depths of it, the behaviors behind them? Are we doing the right things in our businesses and our internal comms to activate them? So if we go down that route and we see, for example, our colleagues in the external comms team or PR saying, look, let's get out there and say we're behind it, let's put out these statements. We can think of many Black Lives Matters as well statements and things like that we've done, because it seems the right story to tell in the public domain, but we're not making it feel right from the inside. What impacts do you think that has in our efforts to drive change if what we're saying externally and what we're driving internally are not aligned?
Elle, I know you've got some strong feelings on this one, so I'll let you dive in on this.
Well, thank you very much. Yeah, I do, because I always kind of put myself in the audience's shoes, and I really think about, like, we've got incredibly cynical employees who see right through this stuff. And actually, Greenpeace just said a couple of weeks ago, we're living in a golden age of greenwash, and it is our Pied Piper to climate doom, which I just thought was very interesting. So I guess, like, as we sort of put down that climate denial playbook and start going into that greenwash spray gun territory, we need to be really, really careful what we're saying. And to be honest with you, I think that telling the stories of the people who are helping you take your journey to whatever climate changes that you need to make in your business is probably the best way to do it. Because if you start talking about offsetting, you're probably not doing anything. Or if you start talking about some of these huge terms like net zero and stuff, it's okay to talk about them, but for goodness sake, make it real for colleagues. And I think you can run a real risk by using kind of jargony terms and big PR statements of alienating everybody, not just your internal audience, but your external ones too, who haven't got a clue what you're saying. And so, yeah, you've got to make your claims credible for a start. So I wouldn't rush to go out with anything that you haven't already talked about and thought about and reflected with internally, and really tested against your colleagues. Like, ask the audience, see what they say, see what ideas they've got as well.
Yeah, and I think going back to something you said a minute ago, Elle, about businesses within an industry working together, I think that's so true. And I think that the tone of the way you talk about this stuff is vital, both internally and externally, actually, because it needs to be the same. For the sake of authenticity, it needs to be the same on both sides of the fence. And I think we have seen some organisations who have treated this almost as a matter of competitive advantage. You know, we are doing more than the next business around sustainability or around, you know, ESG issues. And actually, that's not quite the right tone, is it? Because we're all in this together. Literally, we are on this planet together, and we are interacting as humans together. And you know, it's the same on a kind of international level. We all know, and what we're going to hear a lot of in COP26 in the next month or so, is that it's not going to work if just one nation or one business or one individual goes off and does its own thing. It's going to work if we act collectively for the greater good. And I think businesses that adopt that tone, both internally and externally, will get a lot more mileage and a lot more buy-in than businesses that treat it as some sort of competition for advantage over, you know, their next door neighbour.
And your point on relevancy as well, Jen, earlier, with all of that, you know, playing to your strengths and working within your industry. I mean, Sky made an external facing video called the programs with the shows we don't want to make about climate change, and so they absolutely played into their sweet spot of what they could talk about authentically and communicate about. And I guess just don't try and do something that you're not able to solve.
And I think it is that really important point. I don't know if anybody listening in has got any specific challenges around that they're doing with. And I just wonder, before we move on that point, there is that point around jargon, authenticity, relevancy. Let's not use this as a competitive advantage tool, because that's when we're looking at things with the wrong light. But I just want to ask a sort of, I guess, a practical question on that point. Let's just say we're talking to, you're in internal comms, you see something come through from another department that says, this is the message we're going out publicly, could you tell everybody about it internally? And it's kind of, that's how do we use our influence as a profession to kind of go, let's stop that approach and think about it. Have you had any examples where you've been able to step in or reroute that messaging plan so that it doesn't end up in that danger zone of I guess inauthenticity, if that's the right word?
Yeah, I mean, I think if you're in that situation, then things aren't going well to begin with, are they? If you're in as you well know, Jen, if you're in internal comms and somebody from external comms comes to you and says, "Oh, we're going to say this at 3 o'clock this afternoon," it's probably time to tell our colleagues about it. Something's gone wrong already. And I think, as Al was mentioning earlier, it's about many steps before that, having that conversation. I ran a workshop actually about 2 years ago now, back in 2019, with Visa, one of our clients, and we got together in the room. There were internal comms, external comms, people from within the business, legal and finance from within their internal functions, and also a representative of their, you know, sort of green ESG champions. And it was fantastic to have all those people in the room, because we could then work through, okay, what does ESG or sustainability or whatever you want to call it mean to us at Visa, and why? And what are we doing about it? What would we like to do that we can't do at the moment? And what are the obstacles to that? And having worked through all that, okay, so how are we going to treat this in our messaging, both internally and externally? And having all those perspectives in the room is a massive advantage, because again, if one department or one individual goes off and tries to do their own thing with this, it's probably not going to work. And you need to have, as with anything in comms, you need to have that alignment of messaging, that golden thread that makes it consistent, because that's what enables people to A, understand it, and B, get on board with it.
Absolutely. So it's that point, is it? So we think about the two things that we've talked about is relevancy, find your story, find your area of influence, but then before you go off to your messaging is then get the right collective group that actually are all on that same page. And I'm sure many people leading and many organizations are doing that now, but it's that point of, let's not, because I think sometimes you certainly feel that sense of need to respond as an organization and be seen to, but let's not feel that sense of push at it until we've got everybody on the right page and in the right sense and all those people working together.
Milestones can help there. So COP26 is coming up. I'm absolutely sure that every single IC person has this on their comms plan and is thinking about what they want to do, as well as people externally talking about this. And pick your moments and work towards them, I would say.
Absolutely. So let's go on the assumption that we found our relevancy. We have got all the right people working together. We have a plan. We know what we're trying to do, and we have an outcome or a behavior change or something that we are aiming to achieve. But so now we're thinking, well, how do we get people internally behind that story? How do we get that drive towards, whether that's a behavior change, whether that's sort of an action or understanding or a sense of pride or purpose from our employees, that they feel that sense of, I'm working for an organization that says that it believes in these things and is doing these things. But then we're on to how do we tell those stories to make it in a way that's accessible for all of our people. So, we talk about the average word sustainability. Does that light, and that importance of language, does it light a fire under our belly? Does it get people behind it? And we talked about it earlier. So how should we approach the use of language in this area to tell a better story, to inspire the actions or understanding that we want to within our people?
So again, I know that Ella's got lots of insight on this, but I just want to take one step back, if that's okay, Jen, because I think part of what will play into that use of language and the way you tell the stories is making sure that what you're saying is ideally baked into your business strategy. So, I've seen a lot of our clients, and the ones that are doing this most successfully, an example would be Shivers Brothers, the whiskey maker. They have very clearly set their stall out that sustainability and responsibility, which is what they call it, S&R, is not just a bolt-on in the way that CSR used to be for many businesses, but it is integral to their strategy and the success of their business over the coming decades. We've seen that in the past. I guess organizations like Unilever and Marks and Spencer's with their Plan A, they were businesses that were sort of pioneering this to a certain extent a few years ago. And now Shivers Brothers, in my experience, is doing the same sort of thing. And what that enables is to talk to your people about ESG or sustainability in the same breath as talking about the strategy and the success of the business and what's in it for them. And if you can do that as a communicator, I think apart from anything else, it makes your life loads easier, because you're not trying to think, right, I'm going to talk about our business strategy and try and get people on board with that. And then actually I need to find some time to talk about our sustainability stuff as well. They should be ideally one and the same, and it becomes such an easier message to convey.
That makes a lot of sense.
I'd agree. I work with De Beers on their Building Forever communications, and it's their way of framing their strategy to the world. It's always been inherently De Beers to do this, but they just haven't found a good way of telling that story. And they've really, really thought about the pillars of their strategy and really thought about what they need to communicate. And I guess back to your point on how on earth do we even inspire colleagues with this? Maybe think about, are you going to call it sustainability? Are you going to call it something more interesting? Are you going to call it ESG? If so, write an article called WTF is ESG, frankly, because I have no idea what it means still. So really, really think about the jargon that you're going to use. And if you have to use it, for goodness sake, explain it like in layman's terms, because I've been writing about sustainability for a long time now, and I'm still trying to find the perfect definition for net zero and carbon neutral and offsetting and all of that stuff. And actually, does that really mean anything to employees? I don't know if it's very important to tell that story internally. I think what is a far more compelling story is the real actions that your people in your business is doing. I mean, a colleague of mine in the office earlier was telling me about Formula One and how they're basically, I think it's by 2030, there will be 1.8 billion cars on the road and only 8% of those will be electric. And so they're not just going to solve that problem overnight. So let's just not try and focus on the drive to electric. They're focusing on 100% sustainable fuel that's like lab created, and people can get behind that because it feels like a much more interesting, tangible, positive story. It's only just been announced like literally today or yesterday, and most of the papers haven't picked up on it yet. Really interested to know how they told that story internally as well. And I guess, yeah, avoid that slippery language, definitely, because you're just going to tie yourself up in knots about it. Think about the heroes behind your sustainability story, and particularly going back to De Beers, we did a lot of work around some of the pillar names and really demystifying what some of the jargon was behind it. Like they have a particular word called beneficiation, which is basically the diamond mines bringing greater good to the area around it through many, many sustained ways, not just in terms of value for that area. And I think that word is used as such a hero buzzword in that business, but actually people are going, I sort of know what it means, I don't really know. And we did a lot of work to just break down those buzzwords. And if we have to use them, let's at least explain them and say what they are. The other thing that really works is getting employees to talk about this ground up, but on something like a podcast where you can have a debate and a discussion about this, where it's not just, here are the bold facts from the company, and isn't it great that we're doing this, but actually it's the even best podcast when employees are slightly testing against that strategy and going, but what do we really mean by this? What are we really going to do? And maybe I can help, you know, like let's get that framing slightly differently to away from kind of what are we doing and maybe like into what's next and a few more solutions. That's what I'd suggest.
Yeah, I totally agree, Ellen. I think in terms of the language, you're right. You know, we've mentioned ESG several times. You don't really want to be calling it ESG if you can help it in every communication that goes out there, do you? And one of the things that we've landed on with a few clients is the word impact. You know, and because that can cover a whole range of things: environmental impact, social impact, and everybody understands what the word impact means. So it simplifies it, it allows people to get on board with it a bit more. And I think if you can, you know, impact might not be the right word for your business, for people that are listening to this podcast, this webcast, but find that right word and then, you know, use it and explain it and explore it with your people, as you say, Al. I think about another example. So BP is another client of ours, and they are another great example of how sustainability and environmental issues are absolutely baked into their strategy. And it's kind of not surprising, right? Because if you're BP for however many years, in the last 100 years, you've basically been in oil and gas business. And now they totally understand that that is not going to be the case in another 100 years. So if they want to be here in another 100 years, or even another 50 years, things are going to have to change. And so there's a business imperative there. There's also a kind of social impact imperative, because BP has recognised it can't continue to do the things it used to do and contribute positively to the planet and the environment. And there's nothing wrong with that. You know, there's nothing wrong with the business imperative going hand in hand with the social and environmental imperative. But what we've done with them is take the pillars of their strategy, many of which are based around sustainability goals, but then, as you said, Al, use employees who are out on the front line to tell the story through video or podcast or whatever of how they are making a difference in that area already. Because particularly in an organization of that size, and there are lots of businesses like this, absolutely huge, the chances are somebody sitting in one part of the business has no idea really what somebody on the front line of another part of the business is actually doing day to day. And that's to be expected, how can they? But I think if you can get colleagues to tell that story about what they are doing and what the difference is that it's making in a kind of sustainability context, it just brings it to life for people.
I think that's right. And I think it brings it to life for the brand, and it makes, I think, as customers, and it's that point of, we talk about it in the loose term of trust, is who do I trust and where do I believe? And actually, as a customer, perhaps we all want to trust these brands are saying and doing the things that they want to say. But if we can see that story related to something from that to the employee side, it really helps, I think, build that sense of brand trust, both internally and externally as well. So I think that's a brilliant piece of advice to think about as we approach that sort of sustainability story piece. And you've just talked about it there, and whether that's, I often think as an institute, well, what's our role? What more can we do? And it is that point of relevancy as well. And I do think social impact is also one of those. And we talk a lot as a team about, what do we care about? We care about many things, but what do we care about as the things that we can make a difference on? And actually, because I talk a lot about actually the problems and the answers lie within the employees about how we make these changes, or how we develop these initiatives, or how we do the right actions, because actually those are the ones on the ground understanding or seeing the issues. And obviously with the changing of work and the changing of internal communication, we talk a lot about the power of employee voice. We talk a lot about the power of listening, a lot of the power of involvement. So we've talked about using them, but how do we bring them to co-create the solutions? Yes, there's getting them to be the storytellers, but how do we use employees as that place to kind of go, these are the behaviors or things that we need to change in our operation that will create the strategy that we've put forward?
Yeah, it's a fantastic point, because you've got all those brains out there, haven't you? When you're a business, you've got all those brains in your employees' heads. Why not use them to help you make a difference? And again, I'm going to come back to Shivers Brothers as a great example of this. So they've been working largely behind the scenes and been doing it in a really sensible, quite cautious way on their S&R approach. And at a leadership level, have put all sorts of plans in place, and we're making progress towards them. They hadn't gone out and done the whole greenwash thing with employees that, oh, look how great this is. And the time came earlier this year to start talking about it with employees. And one of the things that they did was called the Good Challenge. And it was effectively a big ideation competition that they ran across the business to, first of all, explain to colleagues what are our points of difference in terms of sustainability and impact. And they articulated that very clearly. And then, okay, what do you think we can be doing? What ideas have you got that will help us make the difference in these areas? And they ran it, like I say, as a competition. People could send their ideas in digitally. There was a whole judging process, and there was an incentive as well, because the finalists would go to a kind of celebration event at a regional level. They would get some training in terms of how to pitch an idea. They then pitch to senior leaders in the business and some external guests as well. And then finally, there was a winner who got support to implement their idea, both financially and in terms of allowing that person the time to develop the idea and bring it to fruition. And the response was absolutely phenomenal, because guess what, people care about this stuff. We can't escape it. It's all around us, and we're seeing the impacts of it with flooding in different parts of the country, let alone the world, and various other things. And so people do care about it, and the number of ideas were phenomenal, and it was a really successful way of gathering those ideas, but also raising awareness of everything that the business is doing and intending to do and trying to do around sustainability and responsibility.
that's a fantastic example, and it is that point of involvement, and it just so powerful. And as you said at the very outset, this is a problem we all want to solve as a society. So let's the power of organizations to evoke that sense of human change or human involvement or people involvement is actually really quite powerful. And I just wonder then, we've got those kinds of things, just moving on in terms of that point around framing and hitting that right tone. We've talked about a little bit to drive that positive change. We've touched on a little bit, but I think another area that gets quite confusing in terms of, when you talked about embedding it into the strategy comms and the way that we're doing it, is as professionals, as internal communicators, we want to sit there with our comms plan, or we look at our messaging and going, well, is this is our purpose message, this is our behavior comms, this is where we're trying to seek an outcome, this is where we're trying to seek an understanding, these are the tactics and the way we're going to deploy that through our channels. Now, is there a way we should frame this? Is it purpose? Is it behavior comms? How should we actually approach that kind of hitting the right tone and the right excuse me, with our comms from the outset? Where do you bucket this? Because I feel like it's going towards purpose, but is that where we need to be thinking about it?
Yeah, I think we need to be honest and authentic about it. And so if you're a business that's got a purpose already, you know, a stated purpose, then think about, you know, quite honestly, does whatever you're trying to do in the sustainability space ladder up to that purpose? Ideally, you would hope, yes, it does. In which case, explain how that works, I would say. You know, and similarly, you know, strategy should ladder up to purpose ultimately through vision. And so ideally that will all mesh together, and the job of the internal communicator, then, I would say, is to explain in relatively simple terms how that all works, with the kind of golden thread running through it. I think what you can't do is try to retrofit something, you know, a square peg in a round hole. If you've been talking about purpose and vision on one track for the last couple of years, and suddenly you decide, oh, we better do something about sustainability and responsibility, trying to just kind of jam that in and go, oh yeah, this is part of our purpose, if it kind of isn't really, that's not going to work. It's not going to feel authentic. And you need to either take a step back and go, is it time to reshape our purpose and vision for the next 5, 7, 10 years? Or no, it isn't. So we need to find another way of talking about the sustainability piece.
I think as well, you talked about tone and thinking about the people at the heart of this. You know, we are the generation that will solve this, and we have to take that will rather than might tone. And I guess that means facing reality with the courage that's required to meet it. That means really truly inspirational leadership on this, from internal figures, taking some inspiration from external figures as well. I mean, Greta Thunberg's just done a really interesting article in The Guardian a couple of weekends ago when they relaunched their Saturday magazine with Simon Hattenstone, and she was pretty, well, as isn't she always, but she was so forthright. And what I really loved about reading that piece was just that she said, you know, COP26 will happen, politicians will get together, they will say some things and things won't happen, but I'll still go and I'll still get in there. And I guess what I'm trying to say is that real kind of stubborn optimism, a drive to do better, is a really good tone to take. And I was talking before about what's next and solutions, rather than just, you know, you said at the start of this webcast, Jen, it feels cataclysmically large. And that is overwhelming sometimes. And if you can break it down into the bits that your business can do really well, or that your industry can do really well to support this, and make it feel less unachievable, and like Al said, working together to kind of fix the planet, but in a real kind of non-fluffy way. You have to face into this with grit as well. I think that's the tone for me that I would take.
I think it's a really good thing, and I just want to move on from that as well a little bit in terms of the practicality. Is in terms of thinking about that in terms of the everyday communication of our everyday internal comms. We're trying to deal with a lot at the moment, from whether that's trying to embed the right behavior changes in hybrid working, from trying to have, you know, fairness, community, conversation when we're agile and dispersed working, and globalization, economic factors. There is so much going on. So I guess from what I'm trying to ask is, how do we embed this as a continuous dialogue, rather than just being something that we just go, oh, it's quarter, we need to kind of do a story on that, and then we'll have an event, and should we talk about that on our social channel? How do we get past it feeling like something that we need to fit in, so it gets to the point where actually it's kind of baked in, if you like? What does the best baked in approach of continuous dialogue look like?
I guess I think this is the most important story you will tell this year, certainly. And whatever you need to do to bake that into your comms team. So whether it's setting yourself up for success with a set of principles that says, in every story we will think about, I mean, it should be baked in, but like, we will think about this being diversely representative of our business, or whether it's another principle that says, you know, we will always think about the sustainable angle before we produce any piece of comms. It might sound like over engineering to give yourself a checklist, but if that's what you need to hold yourself to account, maybe that's what you should do. But because Alistair was so right about it being baked into the business strategy and the purpose, if it isn't in there, maybe rethink that, I would say.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think as well, the other things that you mentioned there, Jen, like return to office and hybrid working and things like that, massively important, and something that our clients are really wrestling with at the moment, and we're helping them to wrestle with. But those things themselves provide an opportunity to think about sustainability, responsibility, or impact, or whatever you want to call it. Because as you shape your ideas about how often people should be in the office, what the new office looks and feels like, think about that with a sustainability lens. So is it absolutely necessary that you have all your people commuting and therefore using energy and resources every day? If not, then telling that story of your approach to hybrid working can include the sustainability angle on that. When you get back into the office, you know, we've all been out of the office or workplace, or a lot of us have, not all of us, but a lot of us have for large periods over the last couple of years. What have you done in that time to improve the environment from a sustainability and responsibility point of view? Whether that's, you know, changing the way waste is managed in the workplace, or making adaptations so that workplaces are more accessible for people with disabilities, whatever it might be. You know, this has been an opportunity to think in those terms, and as Al said, to bake in the sustainability and responsibility angle to whatever it is you're talking about, whether that is the return to the office, or the direction that the business is going in over the next 5 years, or whatever.
No, I think it's great, and I do think, and I, you know, you talk about it a lot, is that point around the social impact as well. And let's not be afraid of telling that. And I like that idea of having those principles, because sometimes as a comms person, when you're dealing with, or as a leader, or when you're dealing with things on so many levels, it's you kind of, you walk away sometimes from a comm or just a conversation. And like I said, sometimes it's not a written word. It could be, I'm just holding a session, or I'm doing a leadership event, or I'm just talking with my line managers, for example. How do we use those instances so that actually you don't walk away from that something like, oh, I didn't link that to that, or we forgot that touch point. And I just want to pick up on that. How do we use those? Do you have any examples or things that you're working with in terms of that coaching, or using that leadership and line manager point of view, which is the continuum of part of telling that sustainability story?
So I think this is something that can become a really good habit. And so, you know, Elle's point about the checklist may feel a bit unnatural at first, But I think it's a good idea. So when you're communicating, particularly preparing leaders to have conversations with external stakeholders or with colleagues or with managers and leaders in the business, when you're preparing them for that, having that checklist so that you are thinking about the sustainability and responsibility and social impact elements of whatever the topic is, will enable the leader to just get into that good habit, so that after a little while, it kind of becomes second nature. Why would we not talk about this? Why would we not think about however this topic links to our sustainability approach? So I think Elle's point about the checklist is great. And I also think, point that Elle made earlier about listening from the ground up will help, because colleagues are bothered about this stuff, as we've already discussed. So enabling them to have that open dialogue, that voice and a stake in this, will be a constant reminder, therefore, for managers and leaders that, guess what, this is important, so we better keep talking about it.
Yeah, I'm thinking about preparing those leaders for those briefings. They honestly don't know what they don't know. And if I had £1 for every time I assumed somebody would automatically know what was on our comms agenda, I'd be so rich I wouldn't work in comms anymore. I don't underestimate the power of telling people what you think they know, because they might not and probably won't. And I guess, do you know those leaders that get the bit between their teeth on this and really, like, it becomes a passion project? This is their moment to really shine and stand out as inspirational leaders. There's a reason why everybody loves James Timpson for the work that he's done in social impact, and he's not done it because he was looking for kudos. He's done it because it was the right thing to do. And ultimately, I guess, if you lead, we often think with leaders, lead with the business case and why this is important, because they'll get that. But I'm going to challenge that and say lead with because it's the right thing to do, and follow up with the business case.
Like that. It's a good challenge, isn't it? And like I said, there's some amazing leaders out there that have been saying it for a long time. And I think when our briefing guy was talking about, I remember, I think it was Unilever, Paul Polman, who was CEO many years ago. He was always really into sort of water aid, and actually that was always been a big part of that. And actually that was a really really inspiring leader. And I wonder how the world was aware of that. And I think now there's the pressure to make us all aware of that. Hopefully there'll be more of that kind of communication shining through, because I think we all want to listen to it, and we all want to hear it, and we all want to hear the intended action behind that statement, so we can feel like we're making a positive change. As humans, we go to bed night going, did I do something good today? Was that the right thing to do today? Actually, I didn't. I put the recycling out. I think about this. I did the recycling well this week. Yay, I have done the right thing, and it is sometimes those small wins. And I wonder if we need to make more time to celebrate those small wins or acknowledge those small wins, because when something feels so overwhelming and huge to change, and it is about acknowledging those small steps as well. Obviously, if anyone's got any questions or they want to pose or advice or things they're looking for, do drop them in the chat box. But I wanted to really round up with asking around, we talked about a lot of things around this, but have you got any great examples of comms teams doing some good stuff in this space, kind of that magic formula that has all the elements that we've been just talking about? Is there things you go, if this is the best case to follow, these are ones I would recommend?
Yeah, I can jump in on that. And it was when you were talking about the Unilever CEO, and I was thinking, who's a really inspirational leader in this space who's worked very well with their comms team? And I'm going to shout out Bruce Cleaver, who's the CEO of De Beers, who has absolutely taken the bit between his teeth on accelerating equal opportunity for women. And so they've done a lot with UN Women and He for She, and has really asked everybody in the company to sign a He for She pledge, right? It's one thing that they have to do. He's also taken an incredibly interesting stance on HIV and AIDS to the point where, you know, basically where the business started back in the 80s with the AIDS epidemic, you know, like 60% of their people either died because of it or had it. It was a significant like threat basically to the workforce. And today they've managed to get that down to about like 0.06%. It's incredible. But Bruce has been at the heart of telling that story and has been there saying, I've taken the HIV pledge, will you stand with me? And that takes some chutzpah. Standing behind a cause like that, that's a bit on the risky side of comms, let's be real here. And I think that's a great example, and where the comms team has brought it to life, following up with his big inspirational leadership messages, is they've made it really simple for people to understand. So this is not about a 500-word article telling you why it's so important that we stop, you know, that we help support people with HIV and AIDS. This is some quick GIFs that they've used with big flashpoints of numbers because they've hit some incredible milestones. Nobody really needs to know much more than that at a high level, except that we're doing great work here, and it's a reason to feel proud. And I would really encourage people thinking about communicating and the messages they want to land, what needs to be the long article and what really just needs to be the 2-second takeaway. I can look at a digital screen, or I can scroll past on Workplace or whatever it might be and just go, wow, I feel proud today. And that is what sustainability comms should do. It should make you feel proud of your business.
That's great advice.
I think the other thing that the comms teams that are successful in this field doing is enabling the leaders that they work with to figure out what it is that they're passionate about and major in that, if you like, because we've all got different experiences, different life experiences that we bring to work, and so different things are going to be our points of passion. I think about Visa as an example. So very senior leader in Visa Europe, a guy called Anthony Carhill. I don't think he'd mind me saying, he is very much a kind of commercial numbers man. You know, he's worked in finance pretty much all his career. And I think there was perception among employees that they didn't really see that much of the real him. Okay. And then last year, we did a campaign around mental health, and in particular men's mental health. And that, I think, falls under this sustainability and responsibility bracket for a lot of businesses, you know, that employee wellbeing piece. And he took part in a panel discussion with me and some other people from the business and a couple of external people as well. And he just gave so much of himself in that panel discussion. It turned out that he had some stories to share that were really meaningful. He was quite passionate about this as a topic. And I think it transformed the way a lot of people in the business thought about him. And then when it was a virtuous circle, because he saw that reaction, he suddenly thought, okay, actually this is okay to talk about this stuff, and people can relate to it, and it makes me a better leader, a more relatable leader. And so I think, particularly if we go right back to the beginning of this conversation, there's a whole myriad of things that are covered by what we call sustainability or impact. As a comms professional, enable your leaders to figure out what's the one that they really care about most, and then tell the story, help them tell the story.
I love that. I think that's great advice. And I think because we all do have a passion or something with us. And I think sometimes we forget how far we've come, or the things that internal comms has influenced. And actually there's a word that I was just in my mind came out as you were hearing it, is bravery. And I think that there's a real need for that sense of bravery. And you talked about around the HIV crisis and AIDS crisis that we had in the 80s. And it was our 70th anniversary a few years ago, and we did a piece around it. Actually, some work that was done by internal communicators to convince their leadership to go out there and go on record and tell that story that is so powerful. So it is really, and actually the change that has made a conversation able to happen. And I think we are pushing at more open doors, but we need to find our points of passion and relevancy, because it has to feel authentic, it has to feel human, and it has to, I think, feel actionable, and it has to feel involved. But I think that we all want something, and we just need to find our place and our bravery. And I think there's so many tips that you guys have given today, from whether that's principles, whether that's baking it into strategy, whether that's having it so that your leaders are passionate, making sure we have involvement, think about the action set that we can create, that we can all hopefully take away and help really tell us sustainability stories and impact stories for the greater good. And I think that more than ever, as human beings, we want to feel that we're part of that, rather than an observer of that. And I think that's a real moment in time that we're all part of right now. Thank you so much, Alistair and Elle, for coming on today and sharing those stories and those advices and those examples. Hopefully everyone listening has walked away with some real great things they can go away and think about and action. And hopefully we will see you all on the next webinar very, very soon. Thanks again to Alistair and Elle.
Thank you.